and welcome back to Loopy Mabel Vintage Style Crochet. My name is Jane, and one of my previous videos I was working on the cluster stitch and it created this lovely texture here, but I wasn't happy with the edging that the chain 4 created at the beginning, so I've been working away on trying to do a different method to improve that, and I've come up with 2 ideas. So if you want to come and watch and see what I've been up to, I shall see you in 2 seconds. So this is what I've come up with. I've come up with 2 ideas, so see what you think. So obviously normally we would chain 4 and turn. The first idea to reduce that hole slightly is to only chain 3. 1, 2, 3 and turn. So by doing the 3 we're just reducing that size slightly and just carry on as we would normal. So we would then go into our first chain space and do our cluster. So I'll just make the cluster. I'm doing a 5 loop cluster, so there's 5 loops on my hook. You can do it with 4 loops on your hook if you want to make the cluster slightly smaller, and yarn through, and there's your first cluster. So if you're not familiar with the cluster stitch and you haven't seen my previous video on the cluster stitch, it goes, you make your cluster, chain 1, make your next your following clusters into those chain spaces. So yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, 1 more. So we've got 5 on our hook, yarn over, pull through to make our cluster, chain 1, then down into the next chain space. So if you're not quite familiar with the cluster stitch, if you want to go and check out that other video, because this video is purely just to show you what you could do if you don't like those holes on either end like me. So I'm going to work all the way to the end, doing my cluster and my chain 1, so I shall see you at the end. So here I am at the end of this row, so I've just chained 1 and I'm just going to do a final treble into the last stitch on the end, just to complete that row. And there again you still tend to get a little bit of a hole, but it's nowhere near as big as the previous rows where you've done chain 4. The reason why you're doing the chain 4 obviously is because it's chain 3 to count as your first treble and then the chain 1 for the space, but I seriously don't think you need to do the 4. I think you could get away with just the chain 3 because it still creates a space for you to insert your hook in. So and it also looks a very similar size to that treble on the other end, as opposed to this one and this great big hole. So that's the first row there. So obviously you chain 1, you turn, and you do your second row, which is obviously double crochet into the very same stitch, double crochet into that chain space, chain 1, then we're going to double crochet into every space between the clusters, chain 1, double crochet into the cluster space. So I shall continue all the way along with chain 1, double crochet into the clusters, and I shall see you back here, and then I'll show you version 2 of what I've come up with. So I've worked my way along, so I'm just now towards the end, and don't forget this is my chain 3 version rather than the chain 4 versions here. So there's the chain 4 versions, this is the chain 3 version, so the hole is slightly smaller. So you just continue on as normal, so you do your double crochet into the last space there, and then just double crochet into the top of your chain 3 as you would normally. Oops. And the double crochet. So you may think, well, there's not a lot of difference there, but the hole is definitely smaller than those. I think it's a much better improvement. But I've also come up with another way of doing it. So this way is a lot different. So instead of chaining 4 when we turn, this is what I've come up with. Chain 2, 1, 2 and turn. And I'm going to use that chain 2 to form part of our first half treble. So that's going to be pretend half treble, but we need to get more loops on our hook for that to be. So yarn over twice, and I'm also going to work my cluster into this first stitch rather than going across into the next chain. So by working into this stitch, you are creating one more cluster. You're not creating any more stitches, you're just creating one more cluster there rather than skipping along and leaving just a 4 chain. I'm going to make my cluster there, and then we'll continue on as normal. So I'll show you how it looks. So I've done my chain 2, so we're going to yarn over and then down into that same space, make our cluster. So yarn over, pull through 2, and by yarning over twice at the beginning, we've now created that loop we needed. So then yarn over, pull through 2, 4, yarn over, down, pull through 2, we've got our 5, yarn over, pull through them all, chain 1, and then we're going to go down into our next chain space, and work our clusters as normal. So then we've got 5 loops, pull through, chain 1. So I'm going to work all the way along, and I'll see you when we get to this end. So I've got to the end of this row. So this is the row I did where I've created a cluster on the end. So I'm just going to finish with a chain 1 and then a treble into the top of that last stitch. So these are my 2 rows I've done. So this is the chain 3 method, which I think is a slight improvement on the chain 4 method. So that is the cluster method rather than doing chain 4. So I'm going to do a few more rows like this just to show you what the edge looks like, because obviously you can't really see the edge yet. So I shall see you when I've done a few more rows. So I've completed a few more rows and just wanted to show you what that looked like. Now I think I've done, you can see the rows I've done there compared to these. I think that looks far better than that. So it's just an alternative, and I just think it looks far better. So that's the first option I did with only 3 chains, so it does make the hole slightly smaller, so you're doing the pattern exactly the same but just 3 chains instead of 4. Instead of doing 4 chains, we do 2 chain, yarn over, then into the same stitch we make our cluster. So instead of doing 4 chains and then a gap and then our cluster, we're just putting an extra cluster in, so we're not making any more stitches as such, we're just putting a cluster in. Instead of having this holy gap, I'm just putting a cluster in there, and I just think, I'm sure you'd agree, that looks better. I'm always looking to improve, and I just think this looks much better. If you're interested in what I've used in this tutorial today, what yarn I've used Drops Lima, and I've used a 4.5mm hook. So if you do come to try these versions, I'd love for you to let me know in the comments box below. Obviously these are just alternatives, and I just think it looks much better. It's not perfect, it's not totally straight, but it's a lot better than there. So I do hope you liked this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you do give either of these two methods a try, please let me know what you think in the comments box below. I will put all the links to the equipment and the tools that I've used for your information. But until the next time, as I always say, practice makes perfect, and happy crochet!